Hey, I'm Kara. I'm an ultrasound tech, and let's talk today about internal exams and the first trimester. So, this question here was left on one of my videos asking if at 8 weeks, 5 days, she should be expecting to have an internal ultrasound or not during the scan. And we definitely don't know without actually seeing what the picture looks like and what the scan looks like transabdominally. If you are 8 weeks, 5 days, usually that does not warrant an internal scan because we can see everything well from up above. But if you are earlier than that, let's say 7 weeks or under, we then usually have to do an internal exam just to be able to get the best measurements possible. And also because at that point, baby is really tough to see because it is so small. So if you think of a transabdominal scan, what we are doing is we are putting the probe just on the surface of the skin, and not only does it need to go through skin and fat and the bladder, as well as the uterine wall, before we even get down to baby inside the gestational sac, but the transabdominal scan is also a little bit more dependent on whether or not your bladder is full or empty, and if your uterus is retroverted or anteverted. Basically, there are just a lot of factors at play when we are doing a transabdominal scan versus when we are doing an internal scan. We can usually see everything pretty well on 99% of patients, and the picture is going to be more clear. But if we do not need to do the internal scan because we are able to see everything well from up above, we are not going to subject the patient to that because we don't want to be ultrasounding the patient more than we need to, as well as for everyone's comfort. Usually, patients just prefer not to have an internal scan if they don't need to have one. So I thought it would be really helpful to illustrate what it can look like with an anteverted uterus or an anteflex uterus, so something like this, which is for the majority of women, and how it is much easier to see than something that is a retroverted or retroflexed uterus, which is this one kind of down there. It's also important to note that after the first trimester, most uteruses that look like the one down there, so the one that's kind of flexed backwards, it does end up popping back up in the second and third trimester. So then we don't really have to worry about uterine position unless it is one of the uteruses that is just stuck in that kind of tilted back position. In those cases, it will still be tough to see baby due to uterine position. But for everyone else in the second and third trimester, the uterus usually just comes right back up, and then we don't have any issue seeing baby because of uterine position. Anyways, so with this uterus right here, you can appreciate that it is curving up this way. And how we are orientated on the patient is our camera is always going to be on the top side. So this is where our camera is always going to be. This is where the camera is. You can see there's only about, this much distance between the camera or the skin surface and what we are trying to see here. In this case, it is the gestational sac, that kind of black area that they are pointing to on the screen there. So there's very little space, only about that far down that we need to penetrate through to be able to get down to the gestational sac and be able to see what is in it. You can imagine that the farther we have to go down, so, the farther we have to travel down here, the ultrasound wave is going to be weaker. It is going to deteriorate the farther we have to go down. So in this case, since the uterus is tilted upwards and the gestational sac here is pretty close to the skin surface as up here, we're able to get a nice clear image, and therefore we would not need to use any sort of internal imaging with this patient here because we are able to see everything pretty well transabdominally. This uterus, on the other hand, you can see that the cervix is over here, and then instead of tilting upwards like the one up there, this uterus is tilting backwards. So the fundus of it, the top part of it, is actually pointing downwards here. So it's going like this instead of going like this in this picture up here. You can appreciate that the distance between the skin surface, which is up here, and the gestational sac, which is all the way down here, it is a lot more. It's like this compared to like this in the picture up here. So like I said before, the sound waves are then deteriorating more, it is attenuating more, and therefore we are not able to see the structures that we want to, like down there where they are pointing to at the gestational sac and the yolk sac, as clearly as we would if the uterus was closer to the surface, closer to the camera essentially. So in a case like this, it is not going to be easy for us to see, and therefore if we are not able to get a good picture of what is inside here, like if we only see a gestational sac and a yolk sac from up above, then we are going to question whether or not we are missing any sort of embryonic activity in there, and therefore we are going to resort to an internal scan to be able to see the structures more clear, because we are right up in there with the internal camera. Essentially, we are just right at the external os of the cervix, and there is very little distance between what we want to see and where our camera is. So essentially, you can just think of it as an internal scan will give you a more clear picture for the majority of patients in the first trimester. So if we are suspecting any sort of abnormality in the first trimester that we are seeing from up above, we are going to then go to an internal scan to be able to hopefully clear up that abnormality a little bit more and to get a little bit more detail on it. So hopefully this has given you guys a little bit more of an idea as to why we need to do internal scans in the first trimester. And also that we don't know if we are going to need an internal scan or not until we put the probe down transabdominally to see how things look like from up above first. So, really, really long story short, I would say if you are still in your first trimester, just to expect that you may get an internal scan during your ultrasound. Again, not everyone is going to get one if we can see things from up above really clear. But if you are earlier than expected, or if things are not seen clearly, either due to the fact that you are too early, or due to patient factors such as the uterus is tilted back, or that there is an increased BMI, essentially an internal exam is always going to give us a better look at everything from the inside. So just be prepared that you may need an internal, but it's definitely not something that we are going to need to do on everyone.